I was 1 day shy of my 24th birthday when I married my husband Gabriel. Within 3 months of our wedding, we were sitting in the office of his urologist, who gave us some very grim news. The doctor had found a tumor the size of a golf ball in Gabriel's bladder, which needed to be removed immediately. The growth was cancerous, and his bladder would need to be treated with chemotherapy drugs following surgery. Even more sobering was the knowledge that this type of growth would come back. And it did, year after year. For 17 years, we lived with the consequences of tumor reoccurrences. I'm sad to say that living with this disease became part of a routine that I accepted as normal. Yearly checkups, followed by surgery, followed by months of peace, until the cycle began again. On today's podcast, I invite my husband Gabriel to join me as we talk about the years of living with cancer and the miraculous healing that took place in his body. You're listening to Inspiring Faith, a podcast created to inspire, challenge, stretch, and grow your faith in God to new levels, no matter where you are on your journey with Him. My name is Gabriel Varela, and I'm your host. To begin our interview, I asked Gabriel to share with you a little bit about his background and his journey with God. Here's Gabriel.
I was born and raised in Mexico City, and I was raised Catholic. We went to church when we could, but the understanding of God was not profound. We believed in God, but we did not believe in a personal relationship with Messiah.
It wasn't until Gabriel was in his early 30s that he met his Messiah, Jesus, in a personal encounter, and began a journey of life with Him. However, while living in Mexico, in his 20s, Gabriel had begun to notice some troubling physical problems that began to surface. Occasionally, there would be blood in his urine, but because it was intermittent, he decided not to seek medical attention.
I was a little bit alarmed at first, but then, like anything else, you get used to and you kind of like take ownership of that stuff and you say, well, this is just something that I have and no big deal.
Gabriel lived with this condition on and off for several years, always pushing the reality of an illness to the back of his mind. After moving to the United States, he decided to see a doctor. We had been married for just 3 months.
I noticed that the bleeding started again, so I went to the doctor, and the doctor initially ran the test and the typical process of elimination, and he came back and said, well, there is still some blood in the urine. You can only see it through a microscope, and so I want to do a further test, which I'm going to do a cystoscopy. So that means that we're going to go into your bladder and take a look and see what's causing this bleeding, and so we did that.
Although Gabriel doesn't like to talk much about it, the cystoscopy procedure is actually quite invasive without resorting to actual surgery. It involves taking a narrow tube with a scope attached to the end and inserting it into the opening of the urethra, moving it forward until it reaches the bladder. The procedure is painful even with numbing medication. Following the cystoscopy, the doctor brought Gabriel back to his office to discuss what he had found.
He was very serious, and he said that I had a tumor in my bladder the size of a golf ball, and he said that needed immediate attention.
The doctor didn't know if the tumor was cancerous. He would need to perform another cystoscopy to biopsy the tumor before a complete diagnosis could be made. When the results of the biopsy were in, he called Gabriel to meet him at his office for a second time.
Well, he sat down and he said, you have a tumor, it's large, and it is cancerous. So you do have cancer in your bladder. He was a little bit surprised that I would have such a tumor for my age. I was only 34 years old. And he said, this is something that I see in men that are 60 or 70 that have been very heavy smokers, but in a young man like you, it is quite unusual.
How did you feel when you got that diagnosis? What specifically, how did you feel now you were a believer in Jesus? You had this relationship with God. What were your thoughts at that time about God's will for you in this time?
I remember stepping out of the office and sitting in my car and just sitting there, and the word cancer was like really big in my head. I could not believe that I was dealing with cancer. I mean, to have cancer, really? I was surprised, and I was somewhat shocked. So it was an overwhelming feeling, not of despair, but of how am I going to deal with this, and how is my faith going to be challenged? And I need to tell my wife. How do I tell her? Is this a big deal? It's a little deal. And obviously it was a big deal, but in my mind I was just sitting there kind of numb for a couple of minutes.
At that point, as you were sitting in the car grappling with God, getting this diagnosis, and this word is just so huge, did you feel that God's heart was for you to have this sickness? What was your relationship with God at that time? What did you think?
I felt that God was with me. I felt that I could grab his hand and walk with him, knowing that he would take care of me. I did not think that this was giving to me from him. It was just overwhelming, but I didn't feel despair, didn't feel like I was abandoned. I felt that through the trials that I've gone through in my life to that point, I felt that this was another challenge that I could definitely lean on him.
Following Gabriel's surgery, after the tumor was removed, Gabriel had chemotherapy treatments for a short period of time to destroy any remaining cancer cells. Because bladder cancer often comes back, we were told that Gabriel would need frequent exams and cystoscopy procedures to make sure that any reoccurrences would be dealt with quickly.
I live with that, and with that kind of mentality of, okay, there's something that I have and something I'm going to deal with, and eventually it'll go away.
One day, Gabriel found a book called Living with Bladder Cancer, which he bought as we were adjusting our lives to live with this disease.
And I remember buying that book, and in the book it talks about from the mild to the very dramatic, where they take your bladder out and how to live with that. But I remember vividly one day when I heard that our neighbor was dying because he had bladder cancer at a very late stage, and that kind of shook me up a little bit. Is this illness going to take me? Is this thing going to take me? Those were some of the times where it was it came to reality. It really hit me. And I know that our neighbor did pass away. I started not to take ownership of the cancer. I think we tend to say, I have this, I have my arthritis, I have this tumor, I have this disease. And I learned that as believers, we are not to take ownership of illness because it doesn't really belong to you. If you are a child of God, then you are made whole. Then whatever Satan comes and afflicts you with is something you can definitely reject. And so I learned towards the end that I could reject it and not take ownership of my cancer because it really wasn't mine, because it wasn't given by God.
So for the next 17 years, we kind of settled into this pattern of living where you would go in periodically every 6 months, every year for a check to see how your bladder was, if it was still healthy. And it seemed like almost every other exam, new tumors had surfaced that needed to be surgically removed. How did you feel during that time? Did it become routine to you, or was it never something that was routine?
I honestly believe that it never went away, that in my prayer time and during my quiet times, it was always something that I would bring to the forefront. So I would always give it to God and say, if it is your will, and I think it is, for us to be healthy and to be healed, let this cancer just go away. I did not want to broadcast it everywhere because I didn't want to feel pity from people. I wanted to be strong. I wanted to be a leader. I was a manager, and I wanted to lead. And this kind of like would bring me back to like, oh, poor Gabriel.
So that was the rhythm of our lives for the next 17 years. During that time, much had changed. Not with Gabriel's bladder cancer, but with our understanding of the heart of God. I had encountered God in a supernatural, miraculous way in the year 2000, and we were now propelled forward into new levels of seeking Him and hearing from His voice. Life had changed, and it was great. Until a routine visit to the urologist landed us back in the doctor's office, once again to hear some bad news. Sitting with Gabriel as we waited for the doctor to come into the office, I glanced down to his medical chart that was opened in front of me. Since I had had medical training for several years after high school, I was familiar with medical terminology and medical abbreviations. My eyes landed on the diagnosis written on the page: bladder CA, bladder cancer. Believe it or not, that was the first time in 17 years that the reality of cancer hit me. All those doctor visits, all those procedures, well, those were just pesky growths that need to be taken care of. Gabriel's first dramatic surgery was so far in the past that I had forgotten the severity of his disease. Now it was staring at me straight in the face. How could I have been so naive? The doctor informed us that yes, there was another tumor that would require surgery, but since he had scheduled a trip to Italy with some friends, he would schedule Gabriel's surgery a few weeks out, after he returned from vacation. That was fine by me. I needed time to pray, time to fast, time to seek the heart of God for Gabriel's healing.
I also believe that during that time, God was telling us that sickness did not come from God. I felt that I was supported. People were constantly praying for me, asking me. I didn't feel like the poor Gabriel anymore. I felt that these people really cared and that we were onto something right here. I felt the heaviness, but I also felt the support by my community.
So your doctor gets back from Italy. Your surgery is scheduled. We've been praying. We've been fasting. We have a lot of faith that not only are you going to be healed, but when the doctor takes you into surgery, he's not going to find anything because as our friend had this vision that your bladder was completely new, we were fully expecting, at least I was fully expecting, that was what the doctor was going to see. Was that your expectation as well, or what did you think?
Well, my hope was, because we've been contending with it and we've been fighting against the disease, we've been praying, and people have given me words of visions and affirmations that it was going to be a great outcome, that it was going to be go in and wow, let the doctors be amazed. And so I hope that would be the case. I was confident that something different would happen this time, because if things got worse, hey, God is going to step in and boom, it's going to be a lot better.
So that is the mindset that we had as the medical staff took Gabriel back for surgery. I fully expected that when the doctor came to talk with me, he would tell me how shocked he was that there was no trace of cancer. Late in the evening, hours after Gabriel had been taken into the operating room, the doctor finally did come out to meet me and to talk about the surgery. In his hand were some photos he had taken of Gabriel's bladder during the surgery, which he wanted me to see. He was amazed by what he had found and wanted to tell me what had happened. This was it. This was finally the news that I had been waiting for. I knew that God had healed Gabriel. Now I just needed to hear the doctor confirm this by his words. Instead, what he said shocked me and shook me by a stark reality I had not even considered. The doctor told me, "In all my years of practice, I have never seen cancer spread so rapidly through a bladder." What do you do with words like that? With words that are completely against the words that you've been holding on to, the reality that you've created, and the truth that you've held in your heart? Do you change your thinking because the diagnosis isn't what you expected it to be? What did you feel after you heard the diagnosis? What was your mindset when you realized that this wasn't something that was healed? In fact, it had grown in intensity.
I think I was shaken. I was really shaken. I think my faith was shaken there to be hearing these promises and being ready to have this great testimony to say, well, guess what? Now it's even worse.
Had it changed your opinion about God and his desire for your healing? Did it make you question whether what you had believed up to that point was true? I know that at that time we were getting a lot of flack from people who saw the outcome and believed that we needed to settle into an acceptance that this was God's will for you, and that we needed to release that to him. God, this is your will, that Gabriel has cancer. And they were pretty angry that we were pressing in still with this belief that God had healing for you. So how did that affect you?
It made me question the whole thing about not taking ownership or taking ownership of an illness. It made me question, was it really real that you can be healed? Was it really real that people can pray and there can be true deliverance? It made me question not necessarily my faith as a Christian, but it made me question those particular comments about God gave you this, you have to deal with this is your cross to carry. Your mind tends to go all the way back to everything, and you start questioning what is the next step, what is going to happen now.
Well, and for me, I would not listen to the people that loved us, but were so concerned that we were not dealing with reality, because I just kept believing that every time that I opened pages of the Bible and there was something that was spoken about sickness or healing, it was always God's heart to heal. I never saw that it was his desire to give sickness. And I just believed that Jesus came to destroy the works of the devil. The devil brings sickness. Even in Job's case, when Job was afflicted, it was because the devil went to accuse him before God and said, I want to afflict your servant so that you can see that he's going to turn his back on you. And so knowing that it was really Satan's idea to give sickness, I just couldn't believe that the same God that wanted to heal you was the God that gave you the sickness. And it caused a lot of problems in my relationships with some people that I really cared about, because we didn't see eye to eye on that. In fact, here is something that I wrote the day after Gabriel came out of surgery, as I was sharing the news with our family and friends. I said, I am trusting in God, who is the author and perfecter of my faith, to lead me in his truth on this one. I don't have ready answers as to why Gabriel's cancer persists, but I do know that God is love and firmly believe he is not the author of sickness. I don't want to change my theology to fit my experience, but I want my theology to match what I discover in God's Word, whether my experience matches up or not. And this is what I read. Jesus only did what he saw his Father do, and he healed all who came to him. Jesus came to destroy the works of the devil, the works to kill, steal, and destroy. Jesus carried our infirmities to the cross, and by his stripes we are healed. It's on his word I stand. Okay, so that was our mindset as you were entering the next phase of treatment. Tell me about the treatment that the doctor prescribed for you, what you had to go through after that surgery.
After the surgery, the doctor talked about a different type of medication to be inserted into the bladder. By using the live bacillus of TB, of tuberculosis, which is what that medication is to insert that particular bacillus into your bladder. And when it comes in contact with these types of cancer cells, really it creates like an atomic bomb. It just hits the tumors, but there is also the risk that it spreads all through the bladder, and it causes the bladder to be in disarray, and it's very, very toxic Because imagine you're just like almost putting bleach inside your bladder and then leaving it there for a couple of hours until it gets coated. So the couple of months that he talked about this treatment, at first I thought, well, this is no big deal. It's like that other one that he was inserting, but the side effects of this one, of this particular medication, this chemo, were very, very toxic.
So the doctor explained to us that because this was such a toxic drug, that after the treatment was completed, he would need to go back and re-examine your bladder to see if there were any traces left of tumors. But because that bacillus was so damaging to healthy tissue as well, he would have a hard time discerning what was healthy tissue that was destroyed versus what was cancerous tissue that might have remained. And because of that, he warned us that you most likely, in fact, the probability was very high, you'd have another surgery just to scrape the bladder clean from the residue of that treatment, of how the bladder had been destroyed. How did you feel physically during that time of treatment where there was this cumulative effect taking place in your body?
I remember the first treatment, and after it was done, they said, you need to lie down and rotate every 15 minutes so you can coat all the walls of the bladder. The first one was like nothing, but by the third one, I started to feel my body not wanting that substance inside of me. So I was starting to feel very irritated. The organ got very irritated. It was not really tolerating this chemical inside of me, and I was dreading having to do the following week. It was once a week, and by the end of the treatment, I was physically sick. I was physically had nausea. I didn't want to even walk. It was just painful to walk, to go to work. It slowed you down. It was like you were literally drinking like a glass of Clorox and then going to work.
So the one thing where there is no doubt is that this drug was doing what it was intended to do. You were feeling the effects of this drug. It was powerful. It was damaging, but it was damaging with the purpose that it was intended to wipe out those cancer cells within your bladder. Without a doubt, we knew that this was taking place.
It was, and what I felt is that the doctor, like he said, was going to have a very hard time distinguishing visually what was good and what was bad, because it was like an atomic bomb inside. So the challenge was, I can't promise you anything when I go see, because it may still be there or not.
As the weeks passed, I saw the effects the drugs were taking on Gabriel's body. At the end of the treatment cycle, he was having a difficult time even getting up in the morning to go to work. At least the drugs had been doing what they were supposed to do. The day finally came for Gabriel to have his post-treatment examination, another cystoscopy, so the doctor could visually inspect his bladder.
Well, I got there. I remember you dropping me off, and walked in, and I sat down on the bed that they have for you and putting the numbing medicine. I was laying down, and at that particular moment, I felt that the platform where I was sitting was warm, my back. I felt like this heat in my back. And through the years, I've never felt that they would heat up the little bed for me. And actually, when the doctor walked in, I said, well, this is nice. That is, my back is warm. And he said, oh, is it warm? I said, yeah, but I saw that it was not connected, it was not plugged in, there was no electricity coming to the bed. So it was this heat in my lower back that I was feeling right before he started the exam, which is very, very unusual.
And so the doctor goes ahead and he inserts this cystoscope into your bladder. He begins his examination, and what does he tell you?
he started to look around, and he said, "Where's everything? Where's everything? I can't see anything." He's expecting to see this disarray of cells and tissue, and he expects to see a chaotic bladder reacting to the chemo, and instead he says, "Everything looks fine." And I turned to him and I saw him and I just said, "Well, praise God." And then he said, if I didn't know you for close to 20 years, I would ask you right now, what are you doing here? Because what he saw was a perfect bladder that was not a normal result of the chemo treatment and the chemo disarray of this bacillus that had been there for 8 weeks. Instead, he sees something brand new, like nothing had ever happened. After that, he told me to come back for another cysto, just to do another inspection. And I think it was more like he kind of not believed what he was looking at. He wanted just to confirm, right? So we did. After a week or two, I came back, and he did another cysto, and he went in. And of course, at this point, I'm happy because I know he's not going to find anything. But he goes in, and he had the camera equipment there to take pictures. And he goes in, and he says, "It's even better than last time." It took me back to the vision that this woman at church had told me. And then he said, "I would like you to start treatment for another year on this drug because, as you know, even though this is a good result, we want to be able to continue this to just make sure everything is taken care of and gone away." And even though I was excited, I was not excited to hear that because I knew how toxic that, and to have it for over a year, that didn't make me happy. Even though the intervals were going to be greater, I did not want that at all.
So you called me on the phone, and we were discussing the doctor's recommendation, and I said something to you that made you rethink what you would do from then on. What was that conversation?
Why would you want to do that? Do you believe that God has really healed you? Do you believe that it was a true healing from God? And I stopped and I said, my wife is right. If I truly believe, if I take ownership of this healing, if I take ownership of what God has done in the middle of chaos, whether it's medication or not, why am I not moving in believing that my faith is that strong? I had to take that step.
We live in a world that is filled with sickness and disease, and you and I both know many people who are struggling with cancer right now, and people are desperate for hope, and they're desperate to know what God's heart is. What encouragement do you have as one who is supernaturally healed of cancer? What encouragement do you have for people who are walking that path that you walked through?
Well, I want to tell those that have illnesses or cancers not to lose hope, not to take ownership of this illness that you have, to fight it, to bring it to the Lord every day. God is for you. He wants to restore you. He created you perfectly in His image, and He wants the best for you. And not to give up. Don't give up. Every step of the way, fight this with prayer. Bring it to the Lord. And there may be some dark times, but there also is going to be victory. You have to grab onto victory, and you have to claim life, because He says to us, choose life because He is life. So in the middle of despair, in this middle where things look really dark, like in what happened to me, you can always reach out to Jesus, to Yeshua, and He will be there carrying you through this process. So don't give up. Never give up. Illness is not from God. Love is from God.
So there's just one other reality I'd like to touch on, and that is that we live with the heartache that not everybody is healed. We understand God's heart is for all to be healed, but we don't see that reality in our world today. What's your perspective?
Well, do everything you can. If you have a doctor that takes care of you, if there's a treatment, you want to submit to that. I think that God has given doctors knowledge and wisdom to help a dying world. I do believe that. In the middle of illnesses, you really have to rely on what God wants for you. May His will be done on earth as it is in heaven. We know that His will is for us to have life. But ultimately, we don't know all the mysteries of God. We do know that He loves us and He wants the best for us. And we need to grab onto that more than anything else.
The title of today's devotional encouragement is Cast Down Your Cares. It begins, as you release the cares and the burdens you have over to the Lord, He will fill those empty places with a greater measure of His Spirit. This is why He said to cast all your cares on me, for I care for you. When you do this, you create an opportunity for His Spirit to enlarge His presence in your life. Casting down your cares does not only result in emotional relief, it creates an avenue for Satan's works to be defeated. It is only in faith that you can cast your cares down. Faith that pleases Him, faith that is rewarded. Grow in faith today. You are dearly loved. Thanks so much for listening. I'm really glad you stayed with me to the end. Until our next episode, may God bless you and surround you with His peace. Shalom.